Hello, and welcome to this not quite so short video describing the guidelines that I myself follow when designing my interfaces. They can be applied to more games than just World of Warcraft, but since I'm currently pretty much back into WoW, it will serve as a backdrop to this video. I will also use my own Arms Warrior interface to provide examples for most of the guidelines. While there are a few add-ons and profiles that are shared between all my classes and specs, the setup in the center is highly specific to my current spec, and my next video project will be to go into detail about that one, so stay tuned. The guidelines are in order of approximate importance, but I do not try to claim that they are perfect. They are just the reverse-engineered result of my own tinkering with interfaces since Vanilla WoW, and will serve as a foundation for the more in-depth videos on certain specs. Now without further ado, let's start with the guidelines. Number 1. Only information that influences decisions matters. The most common mistake that people do in interface design, especially early on, is overloading it with information. There's just so many cool add-ons and so much stuff that might be interesting in the right situation, but humans have a very tight limit on how much information they can perceive and process. And any information that you do not need at any given point in time is at best a waste of space and at worst distracting you from what you actually would need to know to make your best possible decision. It's really all about trying to highlight important information and hiding anything unimportant. So here is the general rule whether to show something on screen. If it would influence your decision in a given situation, it should be available, otherwise it should be hidden. Number 2. Players can only look at one place at a time. It's true. While your peripheral vision can make out movement even out of the corner of your eye, you cannot make out any details. If you don't believe me, just try reading something that is on the edge of your vision without ever focusing on it. You'll have a hard time. No, instead of perceiving everything in sight, humans refocus from one place of interest to the next in quick succession, and the easier features can be distinguished and identified, the less time you need to dwell on any given spot on the screen. That means that both the place where to look at and the information presented there should be as easily identifiable as possible. This is actually the reason why my abilities are grouped. I did not want to put all potentially useful information into a huge single block, because the more visual noise is surrounding the tiny tidbit of information you might want, the harder it becomes to identify. So I group my abilities by intention. For my Arms Warrior, those groups can be broken down into offense, crowd control, mobility and other, and defense. That makes it easy to identify if I have enough CCs left for a kill attempt in arena. I can also see at a glimpse if I am allowed to stand a bit longer close to the boss who is casting an AoE before jumping out and charging back in after the explosion. Or I can judge quickly whether to tell my healer that I will be fine even when losing line of sight for a moment. So it's not just about finding individual abilities easier, but also about getting quick overviews of what tools you still have available for different purposes. Number 3. There's only so much space on the screen. Even if all information that you put on the screen is decently interesting as well as separated and distinctive enough to be quickly understood, you still have to pay for it with less visibility of the actual game world. That means that you want to pack as much useful information as possible in as small a space as possible without making it harder to identify and pick up. For that, you need to refine the information that you have available. A good example for this is the rage bar, which will shift between 4 distinctive states. If the rage bar is literally empty, it is hidden, because not being visible is also a state that can carry information. Here, hidden means that you have no rage, while freeing up more of the game world, and that is always a win. Below 40 rage, the bar will become partly transparent, telling you that your executes are not at full power because they can spend up to 40 rage. Between 40 and 60 rage, the bar will be red with 100% opacity. This signifies that all rage spending abilities can be used at full strength, including execute, but that you shouldn't dump rage into slam yet because you might not have enough rage left over for a full execute afterwards. Above 60 rage, it will turn purple, telling you that you can use slam without endangering an execute or a mortal strike potentially coming off cooldown. But there's even more to it. If you spec into Fervor of Battle, making Whirlwind your main rage dump, then the threshold for purple changes from 60 to 70 automatically. This happens because Whirlwind costs 30 rage in comparison to Slam's 20, so you need 70 rage to have at least 40 left afterwards. On top of this, the whole bar will have a red pixel glow if you have Deadly Calm active, signifying that no rage will be spent on the next ability. And right below the rage bar, we can see the swing timer as close by as possible, carrying the information when our next normal hit will bring in the next batch of rage for you to use. So, just by designing the bar in this way, we have covered the balance between rage gain and rage spending, and encoded all we need to know for Execute, Slam and Whirlwind as rage spenders, and included information for 2 potential talents without any need to waste additional space. The same design principle applies to all of the ability icons surrounding this, even if not all of those have as many states as the rage bar. Another thing you might notice is that I try to hide literally all interface elements which are not relevant to combat as soon as I enter combat. Even the chat window hides, and the Raven bars for buffs and debuffs move down to provide as much field of view as possible. Number 4. Players usually focus on the next few moments. This is probably the most contentious of my guidelines, and I'm not implying that players are unable or unwilling to plan ahead. For boss encounters with burst windows, you might try to match your damage cooldowns minutes in advance, and even in Arena you might try to just mitigate damage until the return of your main CCs to allow you another kill attempt. Those are valid arguments, and I do admit that my choices here might lead to a lack of information in specific situations. But from my personal experience, knowing the exact remaining cooldown for something that will still be long gone is not particularly useful to me in the heat of battle. In boss encounters, your damage cooldowns usually have a certain rhythm anyway, where you either use them on cooldown as they come, or you wait for a bunch of them to be ready together so that they can stack. PvP, on the other hand, is much less about long-term planning of specific ability use, and more about opportunities arising from the game flow and the tools you have available right now or very soon to take advantage of them. So here is where my interface design differs from most others. If I execute an ability that has a longer cooldown, like Shattering Throw, the icon for it is gone. It will only return once the cooldown nears completion, and I individually set a time for each ability, denoting when I consider its return soon enough to be worthy of my attention. This can range from 4 seconds for rotational abilities like Overpower up to 30 seconds for big cooldowns like Die by the Sword. I don't only do this for cooldowns either. When I put the rend dot on my enemy, I don't care about the possibility of using it again until I have to refresh it. So the icon disappears until I get close to a refresh and flashes green when a refresh would be optimal. There's 2 advantages to this approach, the smaller one being that I can see a bit more of the game world. The bigger advantage is due to synergy with another design choice, explicitly the grouping by intention. If I am in danger, I can take a look at my defensive abilities and will only see those which are available, unmuddled by those which might be unusable for quite a while. If I want to CC someone in PvP, I don't check every single CC ability individually, I just look at the part of my interface containing all my CCs and will see immediately what could be used or what will be available any second now. This further reduces visual noise and makes it even easier to be aware of your available tools for a given purpose in any situation. And I barely ever find myself searching for and lacking the information in how many minutes some particular skill will be available. For me, this is a very advantageous trade-off, and I'd urge you to try this approach as well if you haven't yet. Number 5. Visual consistency improves everything. No matter how you encode your information, whether you like to use bars, icons, flashing animations, written timers, or clockwise cooldown indicators, you want certain choices to mean certain things and keep this meaning consistent across all of your interface. And this will allow the player to get used to your implicit information encoding and pick up on cues even faster. Let's look at some examples. In my interface, the coloring of an icon is a cue. If an icon is desaturated or grayscale, it means that the given skill cannot be executed right now, while normal coloring implies that you could execute it at any time. Red coloring will indicate that a target is out of range for the skill, which I only ever check for ranged skills to begin with. A green color indicates that an effect caused by the skill is running, and a blue color will indicate that an effect could be refreshed. You can also use opacity or alpha to carry meaning. Across all my icons, 50% alpha always means that an action is discouraged even though it's technically executable. For example, I should not use the rage generating skull splitter ability if I'm already topped on rage. On the other hand, I do use green pixel glows to indicate that the use of an ability is contextually encouraged, like my overpower if I do not already have 2 stacks of overpower on me. I even use Blizzard's bright button glow for mortar strike if deep wounds is missing on the target and getting it right now is essential. Even the colors of running timers have distinctive meanings. White is always a cooldown returning, yellow is an unrefreshable effect running, red means that a refresh should not be done, even if possible, and green indicates an optimal timing for refreshing. Honestly, being consistent in your choices is much more important than what particular choices you make. But I do advise you not to stray too far from what gamers are used to. Green is usually a good thing or opportunity, while red is a bad thing or a warning. And you can use those preconceptions to your advantage when designing. Number 6. Flexibility and convenience trump aesthetics. Probably the second most controversial guideline in this video, and again, there are a lot of good arguments for nice aesthetics. In fact, if you can provide nice aesthetics while not harming flexibility and convenience, I'm always in favor of doing so, even though personally I'm bad at it. But the reason that the weak hours part of my interface looks so exploded and hole-ridden is that I want all talents and PvP talents to adjust automatically. Let me switch around a few talents. If I use the passive Sudden Death, Skull Splitter will disappear from the interface. If I switch from Avatar to Deadly Calm, which is on the same row, it will use the same place because they cannot collide. Well, maybe in Thorghast, but oh well. Talents that result in skill replacements will also occupy the same slot, like when Ravager replaces Bladestorm or Warbreaker replaces Colossal Smash. If we take a look at all available elements in my weak aura settings, you can see that it's actually pretty tightly knit, but depending on my current talents, holes are hard to avoid. Dynamic groups are not an option here either, because you would lose the advantage of finding the same skill always in the same place. Granted, I could create a specific tight block for every possible combination of talents and PvP talents, but even I wouldn't go that far. Either way, when the choice comes down to swapping my talents at will and still only having necessary and useful information versus being locked into a certain combination of talents, lacking information, or having useless elements, I'd rather go with a more flexible approach. Number 7. Choose proper regions to place elements. Even if your interface elements follow all the guidelines presented so far, it still makes a major difference where you place them on the screen. The most important aspect about this is closeness to the center. As a rule of thumb, the more important an information is, the closer to the center of the screen it should be in order to avoid long distances when refocusing. For this, I would like to take my Raven bars as an example. Very long buffs and infinite duration effects are only shown as icons instead of bars, because there's no point in having visual indication on how long they will exactly last. And since their impact on combat is usually very slim, they are only on the very edges on my screen. Then we have all short-term buffs on the target closer to the center, then all short-term debuffs on the target even closer, and last but not least we have all effects which are caused by the player itself, literally adjacent to the unit frame. Now, depending on whether you're a damage dealer or a healer, buffs or debuffs on the target might be more important for you, but the general rule still stands. My own cast bar and the global cooldown ticker are also at the center of the screen, as I try not to spam my abilities but rather execute them very deliberately, one button press at a time, so I need the information constantly. Apart from importance, it also helps to theme certain regions of the screen. My intention grouped abilities are one example for this, but even beyond that you might have noticed that everything on the right side of the screen is related to my target, including my offensive abilities, CC abilities, target health bar, buffs and debuffs. While the left side is all about the player character, so defensive abilities, movement abilities, player health bar, buffs and debuffs. Even beyond that, if you look at the group frames for my party and the enemy arena team, they are also on the appropriate side of the screen. I also have a filtered by spell Raven bar on top of my offensive abilities that lists super important defensive cooldowns on my target like Pain Suppression or Divine Shield, because they strongly influence how, if I can do damage, so it makes sense to keep them close. On the other side, right on top of my defensive cooldowns, I placed important enemy damage buffs like combustion or void form, giving me information about whether and what defensive abilities might be appropriate to use. A close proximity for elements that synergize with each other allows your eyes to move smaller distances and have less visual distortion, improving on the usefulness of your interface. Number 8. Filter rigorously and avoid redundancies. There's a lot of smaller buffs and debuffs which happen automatically as part of the class design but do not have any impact on your decision making. A lot of general Azerite traits and other procs with small scale passive effects fall into this category, as well as debuffs like Chaos Brand, which increases your magical damage taken by 5%. That's nice and all, but this will literally never make the difference for me in a decision on whether to go all in or retreat to my healer in arena. And if it never influences a decision, it's useless in a battle, so I just crop it. Maintaining decent blacklists in Raven or other buff-debuff add-ons to filter out information like that is a hassle, and I would not advise anyone to attempt a complete list from scratch. But you can already take a few things out, especially from your own effects that you don't care about on yourself or on your target. And from there, extend the list, whenever you find the stuff you actually need to know muddled by lesser information. And even for information that is useful to have available somewhere, you should avoid having it multiple times on your screen. In the end, you will get used to only one source for that information, and the other will just be eternal visual clutter. The only exception to this rule for me is buffs debuffs on nameplates, because they can provide information about multi-target situations that your target-related bars usually cannot. This is why I begrudgingly accept it, but otherwise try to have every piece of information on screen only once. Let's get to the conclusion. Building really good interfaces is hard. There's a reason that user experience design is considered a highly valued special field, an art form really, and I'm an enthusiastic amateur at best. This also results in me usually finding something new that could be improved as soon as I finish working on my last improvement. It is hard to cut myself off and say, it's good enough now, and I'm curious if you feel the same when building your interfaces. I'm usually going for highly configurable add-ons that I can mold to my liking, and I will have a link to all the add-ons which are shown in use in this video in the description box. I do hope that you found something useful for your interface building endeavors in this video. Thank you for watching, and see you when I go more in-depth about my weak aura spec interfaces.